So moving on and talking about some more examples of calculating the resultant force, we have another example in this picture over here where you can see a card. Now again on this card, there's a 30 Newton force acting on the right hand side and another 60 Newton force acting again on the right hand side. So the overall force hogi, obviously that would be 90 Newton because we're going to add the forces and the resultant direction would be towards the right. Over here in the second card, we can see that one of the forces towards the right of 30 Newton and the other 10 Newton force is acting towards the left. When we subtract these forces, we would get an answer of 20 Newton or direction kya hogi? Would it be left or would it be right? Where is the larger force present? The left side or the right side? Obviously, 30 Newton is the larger force and it is towards the right hand side. Hence, the answer 20 Newton resultant force would also act in the right direction. Again, we can see a ball in this picture. On the left hand side, we have a force that is acting of 1200 Newton and on the right hand side, 1000 Newton. We are going to subtract both the forces 1200 minus 1000. The answer would be 200 Newton. What would be the direction of the 200 Newton force? क्योंकि ये दोनों opposite direction में थी, we decided to subtract both the forces. But what would be the direction of both the resultant force? Of course, towards the larger force. So 1200 Newton was the larger force. 1000 is lesser than 1200 Newton force. तो जो larger force है towards the left वही आपके पास direction होगी for the resultant force. Here we have a 1600 Newton force on the left, 1600 Newton force on the right. When both these forces are opposite in a direction, we are going to subtract them. And by subtracting, the answer was 0 Newton. Now this 0 Newton gives you two assumptions. The first assumption is that the object was in equilibrium. Equilibrium means, or second आपके पास assumption क्या होगी? Rest position. Now when is the resultant force 0? Resultant force 0 का क्या मतलब है कि अगर कोई object rest पे है, it will remain on the rest position until or unless another external force acts on the ball. Whereas equilibrium की अगर हम बात करें, obviously any object would be equilibrium. Let's say even if the object is not in the rest position, the object is basically moving. But when the resultant force would be 0 Newton, the object or anything would keep moving in a constant speed. Speed would be constant, velocity would be constant, acceleration would be 0. Why is acceleration 0? Because resultant force is 0. We have a formula of Newton's second law, which is F is equal to ma. F is equal to mass into acceleration के हिसाब से अगर हम देखें तो force is directly proportional to acceleration. So if resultant force is 0, then obviously acceleration would also be 0 and the object would be in a equilibrium state. Equilibrium state का मतलब ये नहीं होता कि object चल नहीं रहा, object रुका हुआ है. No, it doesn't mean that object would always be in a rest position. मतलब it would not be moving. It can be moving, but it would be moving at a constant velocity, at a constant motion, at a constant speed. उसके ऊपर जो सारी external resultant forces हैं, they would all be equal and they would cancel out with each other, but the object would still be moving. Frictional force was another kind of force that we would be discussing. Friction कौन सी force है? जैसे हमने tension की बात की. Friction is also a force that opposes the motion of an object. It always acts in the opposite direction to the direction in which the object is moving. ये भी air resistance की तरह ही act करती है. जैसे कि मैं कहूँ that this ball is moving towards the right, then friction would be opposite to the direction of the motion. Let's say this object is moving upwards, friction would be opposite in the direction. तो हमेशा friction is the force that opposes the motion. अगर motion forward direction में है, friction would be acting in the backward direction. So friction is a force that opposes the motion of an object. It always acts in the opposite direction to the direction in which the object is actually moving. For example, this person is moving down the hill. So इसकी जो friction की force है, that is up the hill. Again, इस object की जो pushing force है, that is towards the right. The friction जो है, that would be acting towards the left hand side, and the overall motion would be towards the right. Still, जो friction है, what if the friction is greater than the pushing force? अगर मैं कहूँ कि जो मेरी pushing force है, that is 10 Newton, and let's say जो मेरी frictional force है, that is 8 Newton. Where would the object move? हम resultant निकाल लेंगे. कैसे निकालेंगे? 10 minus 8. Resultant would be 2 Newton. Direction क्या होगी? Direction of the larger force, that would be towards the right. So yes, the object would still be moving at a 2 Newton resultant force in the right direction. यहाँ पे भी यही scene है. But if the forward force, let's say, is 5 Newton, the backward force, friction, is 4 Newton, the object would still be moving downwards with a resultant of 1 Newton in the forward direction. Here we have another person pushing a cupboard. So pushing force, let's say यहाँ पे जो है, मैं यहाँ पे draw कर देता हूँ. Let's say the pushing force in this case is 4 Newton and the force of friction is 6 Newton. The force of friction is 6 Newton and the pushing force is 4 Newton. The cupboard will move or would it not move? It would not move. Why? Because the force of friction is greater than the pushing force. Pushing force आपकी less है. The person would not be able to move the cupboard क्योंकि आपका जो overall resultant force is that is 2 Newton towards the left. आपके पास pushing force is lesser. Here we have the another example. यहाँ पे इस example में क्या बता रहा है that on an object, how many forces are acting at a time? सबसे पहले तो there is always a force of gravity that is downwards, जिसको हम एक weight भी कहते हैं. ये आपके पास एक forward force लगेगी. ऊपर आपके पास एक reaction force लग रही है due to the law of Newton. Newton third law क्या कहते हैं? You should be remembering all 3 laws of Newton as well. बेशक Google खोलें, write them down, memorize the 3 laws of Newton. First law क्या होता है? First law of Newton होता है कि an object would not move until or unless a force is exerted on it. ठीक है. दूसरा क्या होता है? An object will keep moving in a constant velocity or would stop if an external force acts on it or force is directly proportional to the mass and acceleration. F is equal to m है आपका second law. Third law क्या कहते हैं? That we have also studied in the previous chapter or in previous topic में भी हमने देखा था. That if object A applies a force on object B would apply an equal and opposite force on the object A. मतलब अगर आप एक action force देंगे, equal and opposite reaction force would be experienced by the person. साथ ही आपके पास opposing the motion we have the force of friction as well. तो ये एक object है, लेकिन overall जो applied force was greater than the force of friction, hence the overall resultant force would be towards the right and the object would remain in motion. Next we'll be talking about Newton's second law. ये आपका second law of Newton भी है. Second law of Newton. Second law of Newton क्या कहता है? That force is directly proportional to mass and force is directly proportional to acceleration. एक हमने लॉ ये भी अभी डिस्कस किया है that an object would keep at rest or it would keep moving at a constant velocity or speed until or unless an external force acts on it. लेकिन अगर force act हो गई, if there is an external force, the object would no more move at a constant speed. It might speed up. और वो object कब speed up करता है? When there is acceleration, because the acceleration by definition means that there is a change in velocity. By definition, it means that there is always a rate of change of velocity. Unbalanced forces क्या होती हैं? When an unbalanced resultant force acts on an object, the object will accelerate. Unbalanced का क्या मतलब होता है? Balanced forces क्या है? Balanced forces हैं कि मैं right पे कहूँ कि 5 न्यूटन की force है, left पे मैं कहूँ कि यहाँ पे भी 5 न्यूटन की force है. ये आपके पास क्या है? These are balanced. आपका जो object है that would be at rest. Why? Because the resultant is 0. Unbalanced forces क्या होंगे कि मैं अगर कहूँ कि एक ऑब्जेक्ट के ऊपर डाउनवर्ड लग रही है 6 न्यूटन की फोर्स, अपवर्ड लग रही है 2 न्यूटन की फोर्स. नाउ दीज आर अनबैलेंस्ड फोर्सेस. नाउ ड्यू टू दीज अनबैलेंस्ड फोर्सेस द ऑब्जेक्ट इज गोइंग टू मूव डाउनवर्ड्स. डाउनवर्ड कितने रिजल्टेंट से मूव करेगा? नाउ देखिए दोनों जो फोर्सेस एक्ट कर रही हैं, डाउनवर्ड 6 न्यूटन है, अपवर्ड 2 न्यूटन है. व्हेन यू कैलकुलेट द रिजल्टेंट फोर्स वो आपके पास आएगी 6 minus 2 is equal to 4 न्यूटन और उस 4 न्यूटन की डायरेक्शन भी आपके पास डाउनवर्ड होगी. And the object के ऊपर resultant force act कर रही है, when the resultant force is not equal to 0, obviously the object is going to speed up. जब object speed up करेगा, speed up object का मतलब है कि वो object accelerate कर रहा है, क्योंकि rest position में acceleration is 0, constant speed में acceleration is 0, constant velocity में acceleration is 0, constant या same motion में acceleration is zero. But when there is a speed, when the resultant force is not zero, when some object is moving with an increasing velocity, with an increasing speed, वो नीचे आते आते तेज हो रहा है, जब स्पीड चेंज करेगी तो चेंज इन स्पीड का मतलब क्या है, दैट यस एक्सेलरेशन इज प्रेजेंट, ऑब्जेक्ट एक्सेलरेट कर रहा है, उसकी उस सर्टेन टाइम के अंदर वेलोसिटी में चेंज आ रहा है, द रेट ऑफ वेलोसिटी is actually changing per unit time. So force, mass and acceleration are related by the following equation जो हमने अभी पढ़ी थी, वो क्या है, F is equal to ma. F is equal to ma एक इक्वेशन है जिसके अंदर फोर्स, mass और acceleration आपस में related है. अब now the examiner usually asks this question in every paper. Write an equation in which force, mass and acceleration are related. आप इक्वेशन क्या लिखेंगे, इन वर्ड फॉर्म. रिमेंबर, आपने सिंपल फॉर्म में नहीं लिखनी, आपने लिखनी है वर्ड फॉर्म में. यू विल बी राइटिंग फोर्स इज इक्वल टू मैस इनटू एक्सेलरेशन. फुल फॉर्म में आप लिखेंगे तो एग्जामिनर को समझ आएगी, ऑलराइट दिस इज हाउ ही हैज रिलेटेड ऑल फोर्स, मैस, एक्सेलरेशन, द थ्री यूनिट्स इन वन इक्वेशन. तो इस रिलेशन से क्या पता लग रहा है, मैंने अभी आपको पहले बताया दैट फोर्स is directly proportional to acceleration. इसका मतलब ये है that greater the force, greater would be the acceleration, क्योंकि ये आपके पास एक डायरेक्ट रिलेशन है. हमने डिस्कस किया था that what is the difference between direct and inverse relations. इसी इक्वेशन में क्या कोई इनवर्स रिलेशन है, बिल्कुल है ना. mass is inversely proportional to acceleration. इनवर्स रिलेशन क्या होता है, that if mass increases, अगर मैं कहूं कि mass increase हो गया है तो according to this inverse या उल्टा रिलेशन, इसका आपके पास opposite effect होगा on the acceleration. If the mass increases, acceleration would decrease. लेकिन हमें न्यूटन सेकंड लॉ कहता है कि जब आप greater the force you apply, greater would be the acceleration for a given constant mass. Let's suppose वो mass अभी आपके पास 1 kg है, तो for a given force, the smaller the mass, the greater the acceleration. Total आपके पास दो रिलेशन निकल रहे हैं. एक आपके पास क्या है, force is directly proportional to acceleration, and the second relation is that mass is inversely proportional to acceleration. जो mass है वो acceleration से बिल्कुल inversely proportional है. डायरेक्ट रिलेशन में हमेशा ये होता है that one quantity increases, the other increases as well. लेकिन inverse relation में क्या होता है, when one quantity increases, the other quantity always decreases.